There are many different ways of saying approximately in English, and some of them are more formal or informal than others. In this episode, we'll look at some of the most common synonyms of approximately and how to use them in different contexts. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza,
And my name's Craig.
and with approximately 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level.
More or less.
So, Craig, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, my friend. How are you?
Not too bad.
Good.
Not too bad. So.
Well, before we start talking about English and helping you to improve it with some expressions and vocabulary, on a more personal note, we have heard some tragic news from an AIRC and friend of the show. And if you are a new listener, an AIRC, not alcoholic, AIRC, AIRC, Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig, that's a person who listens a lot to the podcast and is really, we consider, part of the community. We don't want to name her to protect her privacy, but she sadly lost her daughter, who passed away at a very young age late last year in December 2023.
Of course, it's never easy losing someone you love, but it's hard to imagine just how devastating it must be to lose a child. And this person, whose name we prefer not to reveal, felt close enough to send us a poem that she wrote in memory of her daughter. And we have her permission to share it with you.
So this is for Camilla, and it's called Grieving You. I don't know how to do it, but today I have to grieve you. While my broken soul tries to move on, and my sky is absolutely grey and cloudy, I have to grieve you. During the unfinished and sleepless hours in the night, when my mind cannot find peace, because I'm trying to get by in this new and unexpected life, I have to grieve you. Yearning everything about you, your face, your smell, your kisses, your beautiful presence, without consolation, I have to grieve you. Deep down, in the darkest moments of my life, I'm trying to figure out how to survive and bear this immeasurable pain in my heart. I know I need to grieve you, but I fight and resist. Through our songs and the letters that flow as natural as my tears for you, holding on to your memories, I allow myself to dream of the moment when you will take me away with you. And then I won't be forced to grieve you anymore. So our thoughts and condolences are with you, and we're so very sorry for your loss.
But thank you very much for sharing that poem, which is very moving.
So it's not easy to continue from that, but we're going to try. We're going to speak about different ways to say approximately, using approximate language. So we have spoken about something similar in the past. We did speak about vague language, didn't we, Reza?
Yes, we made an episode which is more or less connected to what we're talking about today. It was episode 128. So we've put a link in the show notes. If you go to inglespodcast.com/128, you will find the episode on vague language.
So you probably know the meaning of the word approximately. For example, it takes me approximately half an hour to get ready. Not exactly half an hour, but approximately. And it's worth noting that expression, it takes me. The question is, how long does it take you when we're speaking about time? For example, how long does it take you to get ready, Reza, before you leave the house?
It takes me around 40 minutes. 45 minutes.
around 40 minutes.
Around, yeah, about 40 minutes. Aha, that's our new word. So instead of approximately, I could say about or around. For example, if you go out on a Saturday night to a nice bar in Valencia, a beer costs about €4. It might be €3.80, it might be €4.50. It's about €4.
Is that for a pint?
No, for a bottle in Valencia. So what they call here a tercio, a third of a litre.
How much does a beer cost in Belfast these days?
Ooh, for a pint, I think it's about £6 or £7. Does that sound right?
That sounds expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll stay here.
Yeah. We're better off here. Another reason why we're better off here is right now the temperature is around 20 degrees Celsius, which doesn't happen that often at this time of year in Belfast. So the temperature is around, it's approximately 20. It might be 18, I don't know, but it's approximately 20.
A couple more examples. I'll be at your flat, Reza, about 3 o'clock. About 3 o'clock. Or there were around 50 people at the party. More or less, approximately 50. Around 50 people.
You can even add a word. Instead of just saying around or round, you can take away the letter A if you want. You can say roundabout. I'll see you roundabout 7. It's the same. Roundabout, it's the same meaning.
We can also use more or less for approximation. If you translate more and less, it's probably similar in your language. More or less. How much will it cost? More or less. For example, in the past, I've spoken about my conversation courses on this podcast, and more or less, they will cost you about €10 per hour. It's about 10.5, but more or less €10. And there are about 5 or 6 people in each group. So if you're interested in studying English in a small group that will cost you more or less €10 per hour, why not send me an email and I'll give you more information about dates and times. Send me an email to craig@inglespodcast.com and I'll send you an email with more information. And how can people study with you, Reza?
If you're interested in a one-to-one class, you could get in touch with me at belfastreza@gmail.com. And the benefit of a one-to-one class is that we can tailor the class, we can design it for your specific needs. For example, you might wish to prepare for an exam, or you might have to have certain skills necessary for work, or simply you want to be able to speak better English when you're on holiday. Whatever. If you're interested in a one-to-one class, please get in touch at belfastreza@gmail.com.
Another word we could use for approximation is roughly. Now, there's no connection with the spelling and the pronunciation of this word. It's ROUGHLY. The vowel sound is like up or cup. And the pronunciation is roughly. For example, roughly what time will you arrive? Or the movie lasted roughly 2 hours. Now, roughly is a neutral word that you can use in formal and informal situations. Roughly, how much does it cost, for example?
Yes, Quag. Quag?
Quag? Hello, Quag.
Hello, Quaggy.
How about Weza?
Yes, in fact, that example, roughly what time will you arrive, is a question that Craig asks me very often, because I can never say exactly what time I'm going to arrive, because I usually come here by bus, and it varies. So I can only ever roughly tell him what time I'm going to arrive. It could be 10 minutes earlier, it could be 10 minutes later. So we're very, very familiar with the question. Roughly what time would you arrive, Reza?
Another word you can use is nearly. 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 Obviously, something is near to you, it's close. And nearly means very close to a certain amount or a particular number or time, but not quite reaching it. For example, if I say, Reza, lunch is nearly ready, then we are soon going to eat. It's nearly ready. Can you think of another example?
It's very typical when you're talking about someone's age to use nearly. For example, he's nearly 40 years old. So he could be 39, 39 and a half, perhaps 38 and a half. So not exactly 40, but nearly 40 years old. Nearly is a slightly more formal word than about or around, and it implies that something is almost done or achieved, as Craig said. So when you say that lunch is nearly ready, it's the idea of it isn't ready yet, but it will be very soon.
Remember, you can see all of these words and expressions listed in the show notes to this episode. Go to inglespodcast.com/511.
Another typical combination of words you hear to say approximately is, for example, just under, or slightly under, a bit under, a little bit under. Or it could be the opposite, over, just over, slightly over, a little over, etc. So slightly, just, a bit, a little bit, plus the words under or over means approximately, but not exactly. So either slightly less, under, or slightly more, over. For example, John's just under 50 years old. He's 49 and a bit. He's just under, or I could even say he's a little under 50. Or, for example, the turnout for the election was slightly over 2/3, 68% to be exact. So 68% is slightly over 2/3.
You might be listening to this podcast exercising, walking, driving, taking the dog for a walk. If this sounds a bit confusing, remember, go to the show notes. You'll see all of these expressions written for you at inglespodcast.com/511 for 511. Now, some, S-O-M-E, is another word that we can use for an unspecified or approximate amount or a number of something. Because if somebody says, I need some sugar, how much is that? Is that like a packet of sugar or maybe a teaspoon? We don't know. So it's an approximate amount. And if I say, Reza, there are some beers in the fridge if you're thirsty, well, how many beers are there, Craig? Are there 2? Are there 10? Some beers. So some is a very vague word that can be used when you don't want to be specific or precise. For example, would you like some more wine? Is that a little or a lot?
Even though it's imprecise, the word some can actually go with a specific number, but it still means approximately. Let me give you an example. The border dispute between two countries has been going on for some 50 years now, and they still can't agree. Well, I had a number there, 50, but because I said some 50 years, I'm saying, well, not exactly 50. It might be 55. It might be 48. I don't know exactly. Some 50 years.
And a similar word, somewhere, is also a word that isn't exact. Because if I say somewhere in the region or somewhere in the vicinity, that's somewhere around approximately. For example, he earns somewhere in the region of 50,000 euros per year. More or less, somewhere in that area, somewhere in the region of 50,000 euros.
Really? In that case, I can't tell you what he does, but I know he's not an English teacher or a podcaster. That much I know.
No, somewhere in the region of, or thereabouts, you could say. Thereabouts, T-H-E-R-E, there, about, A-B-O-U-T, and with an S on the end. Thereabouts is approximately. So how old is she? Well, I think she's 30 or thereabouts, maybe 31, 29, thereabouts.
Now, if someone were to tell me, I earn about 1,000 euros working quite a lot every month, give or take, I'd say, oh, there's a good chance you're an English teacher. That sounds more like the salary of an English teacher here in Valencia. So give or take is another way of saying thereabouts, approximately somewhere in the region of, for example, a new one will cost you 700 euros, give or take. Yeah, give or take. Maybe 800, maybe 650, but give or take 700. Imagine I'm going on a journey and I want to know how long it's going to take. The verb to take here, right? A journey takes time. That means it's the time necessary for a journey. You might say, well, the journey takes about 30 minutes, give or take a few. 32 minutes, 28 minutes, give or take a few.
Your example just before started me thinking, how much do you think is a reasonable salary in Spain for a single person? Not necessarily a teacher, but just anybody, like a basic salary. Would you say that 1,000 euros a month, give or take, is a reasonable salary to live on here at the moment in 2023?
Well,
or 2024 even?
2023, more or less.
More or less, more or less.
Well, it depends on your circumstances. Obviously, we have to factor in a few things like if you live in Madrid, Barcelona, that's going to be more expensive.
Cost of living.
It's like living in London. Yeah, you need to earn more to survive.
Take Valencia, for example.
Take Valencia, so not Madrid or Barcelona. 1,000, yeah, you could get by in 1,000 in Spain. Even if you had to rent a place to live, you could get by in 1,000. Not much less. But maybe give or take 100 or so, you might just about to be able to get by.
Although rent these days is about 600, 700 euros a month, somewhere in that region.
Yeah, in Valencia city, but if you're prepared to live outside the city, you might get a place for about 400 or 500 or somewhere in that region.
Outside the city centre, yeah.
Yeah. But I think 1,000 if you want a reasonable standard of living, give or take, yeah?
Yeah. Another expression you could use at the end of some information is or so. Or, O-R, so, S-O. How far is the city from here? Well, it's about 6 kilometers or so, which means it's about 6 kilometers approximately, or so.
Another thing you can add at the end, but this time at the end of a word, not necessarily the end of a sentence, but at the end of each word that it applies to, is the suffix ish, I-S-H. For example, imagine I want to describe the color of my shirt. I could say, well, the shirt is a bluish grey color. I can't describe it exactly. It's not exactly grey. It's not exactly blue, but it's bluish grey. So you simply add ISH, pronounced ish, at the end of any word you like, really, in English. It's very common with colours, but you can really put it on anything. For example, how old's that woman? I don't know. I reckon she's 40-ish. 45, I don't know, 38, she's 40-ish. It's very common for people's age as well, or for the time. Craig, I'll see you at 2. Yeah, I'll be around 2-ish when I arrive. Around 2-ish.
I'll expect you at 2:30 then.
Yes, that's true.
What time do you think we'll be having lunch today?
I would say about 2:30-ish.
Yeah, maybe 3-ish. Another expression you can use, which is quite formal, is circa, from the Latin, which means approximately, and it's typically used when we're speaking about historical facts. For example, it's thought the Cid was born circa 1050.
Craig, I've got a few questions for you. Let's see if we can practice our expressions. How many people live on planet Earth?
Ooh, that's a good question. I know it's in the billions, so I'm going to guess around 6 billion, more or less. Do you actually know the number?
I don't know exactly. Nobody knows, but most sources say that it's about between 6.5 to 7 billion, more or less. Why more or less? Well, there are babies born, particularly in poor countries, that aren't properly registered and recorded. We don't know exactly. So 6.5 to 7 billion, give or take a few million.
I know that about 100 years ago, there were about 2 billion on the planet or thereabouts. So it's almost 4 times, it's quadrupled in 100 years, the population. Here's a question for you, and we can use some approximation if we don't know the correct answer. What's the average weight of a typical Spanish person, a male or a female? Now, don't look at me when you approximate it because I'm heavier than the average man. But what's the average weight of a Spaniard?
I'm guessing that on average, men are a bit heavier than women. So let's say for the average Spanish male, are they going to be fatter than me or slimmer? Probably slimmer. So the average Spanish male, I guess, is going to be about 70 kilos. 75-ish. Yeah, give or take. And females, I'm going to go for around about 68, 65. What do you reckon?
Yeah, it sounds good to me as an approximation. Here's a question from one of my favorite Monty Python films. What's the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow, Reza?
Oh, wow.
Do you remember that from Monty Python and the Holy Grail?
It does ring a bell from a long time ago, yes.
Crossing the bridge, and he asked them questions.
And some of them are really easy, but some of them are just
really
impossible to answer, like this one. Crikey. Crikey means, I don't know what to say. A swallow is a type of bird, and laden, carrying a burden. So unladen, not carrying a burden. Good grief. Oh, do you know the answer?
No, I've no idea. I know what they said in the film, but I've no idea what the answer is.
I'm going to go for airspeed of the bird, swallow. Let's say 45 miles an hour, give or take a few.
I have no idea. I think the next question I might have a better idea of.
Yes, here's a question specifically for Craig because he knows a thing or two about this. Craig, what's a reasonable amount of chocolate to consume daily?
Well, reasonable and chocolate don't usually go in the same sentence as far as I'm concerned, but I suppose being objective, I'd have to say that a reasonable amount of chocolate to consume daily would be, give or take, maybe 1 to 2 squares or so every day.
How big are those squares?
How big is an unladen swallow? Reza, how many times a year should listeners listen to Aprender Inglés with Reza and Craig?
Well, really for me, the best answer is as many times as possible. But if I had to give a number, I would say, well, I don't know what, at least once a week, surely. So I'm going to say approximately in the region of 52 times per year. What do you think?
Yeah, I'd say 52-ish, more or less. That sounds like a good number. So we hope we've helped you with some of these expressions for approximately. Now, it's a good idea when you're speaking to have a variety of ways of saying the same thing. So don't keep repeating the same expressions. Learn some new ones. And we've given you a list here on today's podcast. But now it's your turn to practice your English. Is there any aspect of English you would like to know more about? Maybe a grammar point or a vocabulary area? On the website at inglespodcast.com, there is a search box. So if you do think of an idea, search for it first, please. Make sure we haven't already created a podcast about it. And if we haven't, we'll be more than happy to do a podcast on one of your suggestions. How can people send us their ideas, Reza?
Well, ideally, we'd like you to record your voice so you practice your speaking, and then you can upload it using SpeakPipe. So there's a link in the show notes. It's speakpipe.com/Inglespodcast. But bear in mind that the time limit for recording audio on SpeakPipe is about 90 seconds, I think. Is that right, Craig? More or less?
More or less 90 seconds.
90 seconds. So if you can't get all the information into those 90 seconds, well, then I guess you're going to have to write to us. Craig, how can someone get you by email?
Very easy. I'm Craig, Craig, at inglespodcast.com, and emails to Reza go to Belfast, Reza, Belfast the city, and Reza, R-E-Z-A, both together, at gmail.com.
Now, if you're a Spanish speaker and you want to study for free, you could visit the Mansión Inglés website. And also, if you're interested in paid ebooks and audios for self-study, check out the online store. You can find that in a link in the show notes. It's store, S-T-O-R-E, mansioningles.net.
And before we go out the door today, we'd like to thank our Patreon supporters. And you too can become a Patreon member for about $1 or $1.50 per month. I'm never absolutely sure exactly how much because they do put some tax onto the dollar, but it's more or less a dollar or so. And by doing that, you get instant access to the transcriptions of this podcast. Go to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/English podcast.
We'd like to say thanks to all our Patreon supporters, but we haven't got enough time to mention everybody's name. So we, as always, will mention those people who've joined us in the last few weeks, more or less. And they are Samuel Perez, Juan Gatti, Elisa Amparo del Rio Penis, Juan Carlos Alumbreros Fresnada, Gary Razu, Pilar Hernandez Garcia. Thank you to those people, but all our sponsors who help us through the Patreon scheme.
And on next week's podcast, we're going to talk about homeschooling, which was another idea from friend of the show, Mamin. So please join us for that in about 7 days from now. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful week. Until next time, it's goodbye from Reza.
And it's bye-bye from Craig.
The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later. And Dream on Me by Stefan Kartenberg. Creative Commons Attribution License Non-Commercial 3.0 from ccmixter.org.